Do you
Great.
want the color commentary, or a comment on of war stories that sort of punctuate or illustrate a point, or you would just rather have pure sort of intellectual comment?
No. I think war stories really illustrate things, make things come alive. And I think that they're the things that you remember, like all of us, right? There are
Yep.
things that have a great significance, I think. And so, I mean, I want the outlines of what you did and what it
Right.
says here, but as you were saying, what you were thinking at the time and some of the experiences that came as a result of that thinking and and the process, how we all changed by those experiences. So that's kind of the overall way I want to approach this. And so let me just kind of start this by saying,
Sure.
how did you get to Russia? Did you have a long-term interest in Russia? Did you study Russian or some other path that got you there? And when?
I think it's fair to say that Russia found me before I really found it. Specifically, the job that took me there found me rather than me seeking it out. To set the context, I was working for a consulting firm in Los Angeles. I was its vice president, and we focused on trans-Pacific trade relationship building and, to a limited extent, investment boutique type of work, transaction facilitation, really. And generally, our focus was West Coast of the U.S. and Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Not so much mainland China at that point. And there was an interesting migration of interest into the Primorsky Krai area of Eastern Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And we started getting involved in US side clients interested in that part of the world, and some Japanese clients. And I remember giving a talk to a conference in Long Beach about the economic opportunities.
And what year would that be?
This would have been 1991, 1990, 1991, more closer to 91. And interesting, one of our sort of informal clients was a guy named Paul Tatum. Do you remember him setting up?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And he told us intriguing stories about how business was blossoming in Moscow. And Moscow was off my radar of interest until I got a call from a former business school, this is Thunderbird professor, who was on the board of the former Hospital Corporation of America's International Division, which had gone private as a result of a 1989 LBO, and this was one of the assets that was sold off to pay down some of that debt.
Mm-hmm.
So this gentleman, also a lawyer like me, also named Bob like me, said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that our company is looking to set up a network of American medical centers in Russia, and they're looking for a president. Would you be interested?" And I said, "No, I don't see myself having an interest in moving to and living in Russia. I'm enjoying California. I'm enjoying the Pacific markets that we're doing business in." He said, "Look, do me a favor. Fly to Stamford, Connecticut and meet the chairman." So I did that, and I think I did it twice. I may have done it 3 times. And I kept trying to say no to this guy, and he wouldn't let me. And he ultimately talked me into it. This was the last quarter of 1992.
1992. Oh, last quarter of 1992. So
Right.
this was right as the Soviet Union was breaking up or before it? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the dates again.
Well, I guess perestroika would peg its start in around 89, but
Right,
in 91 was when the Gorbachev coup happened.
right. And then
And
December of that 1991 was the breakup. So you
right,
were about a year later. You were
yeah,
right
just
at
about.
the peak of the beginnings of privatization, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
right. That's
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but I just
No, no, I mean, that's
locate.
the long answer to the question of, who found Russia.
So why were they interested in Russia? Why was the Hospital Corporation of America International Division interested in Russia?
Um, its business footprint, the international vision, was pretty wide. It stretched from very modernized health systems in the UK to much less so in Saudi Arabia, Singapore, a few other places, in which they managed principally inpatient facilities, but also some uh, clinics and outpatient. But Dennis Sokol, who was the chair, had other business interests in Russia, and he put together a consortium of large multinational companies, in the context of which it became obvious to him that there was going to be an influx of expatriates who were going to demand Western style healthcare, and there was nobody providing that. In fact,
Mhm.
the country was 40 or 50 years behind the ability to provide that. The quality of medical care then was very, very primitive by US or some European standards. So he decided to create this and had gotten down the road a bit and wanted to recruit somebody to run it. And that
Uh-huh.
somebody turned out to be me.
Yeah. Yeah. So he wanted you because of your managerial expertise and you as a lawyer, you understood some of what he wanted done here. What is that?
Look, the truth be told,
Yeah.
I did not think I was his best pick for this job.
Uh-huh.
And as part of saying no, and part of my reason for saying no, I said, I remember this part. I said, Dennis, I got all this experience. A lot of it's healthcare. I was a healthcare lawyer. We did healthcare deals cross Pacific, et cetera, et cetera. I've never managed a P&L.
Uh-huh.
And he said, I'll try to imitate his voice. He said, Bobby, I think you've got the chutzpah to do this. I think you ought to do it.
Okay. And so when did you first go to Russia then? You accepted the job and then marched off to, did he have anything already set up for you to step into, or you just whole green fields moving to Moscow?
Had the premises, equipment was being set up, operations were commencing,
Mm-hmm.
but it was still somewhat unstructured and just needed some management. I was not ill suited to running it. I just didn't think I was the best
Yeah,
candidate
yeah,
for it.
no, no, no,
Didn't
yeah.
didn't yet speak Russian. But you asked the question when. This was the fourth quarter of '92,
Okay, okay,
and my first trip there was a scouting expedition and looking at housing and
right.
kind of kicking the tires and the opportunity to make sure I didn't want to veto it at the last minute. But then I went ahead and moved over in early weeks of January 93.
93. And did you move by yourself or did you have family?
I did not have family. I was still single. Uh, did not get married until 2011.
Hmm,
So the great, and then I moved from Moscow to Florida in 2019,
okay.
but still have a business there that is not healthcare related. So I guess tying it back to your timing point. So I was single, and for the majority of my years in Moscow, I was single.
Hmm.
And that gave me some exposure culturally to things that a lot of the family guys or women didn't
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Right. Right. So you went over. Who rent? Do you arrange your own housing? How did you figure out where to live and how to get started?
The company had a sort of a fly-in flat,
Hmm.
and that was my initial apartment for a couple of months until, together with colleagues, staff, we sourced something that was sort of more suitable.
Hmm. And where'd you end up living?
If you know the Frunzenskaya Nabережная, the Frunzenskaya
Yeah.
embankment,
Yeah.
right, right there, right on the
Uh-huh.
water, sixth floor, beautiful view of the river. It was
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Was it a rehabbed apartment or?
It's a good point. There weren't many Western renovated apartments in those
Right.
days. So
Yeah.
this was a very nice version of a classic Soviet style apartment. It was well furnished. It was, old style wallpaper, old style everything, but in very good condition and sizable for a single guy.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And so back to to the operations. Did you bring American doctors over? Do you hire Russian doctors? And how did you sort of organize operations?
So the model was that the local doctors were not yet of the caliber to give the Western quality medical care that the expatriate teams were looking for. And we operated on a membership model. In order to attract them to be reliant upon us, we had to bring in expatriate doctors. And we did that from the US, from Canada, from the UK, from South
Uh-huh.
Africa. Um, in some cases, they were first timers abroad. In some cases, they were seasoned expats who had come from other markets. For the top nursing teams, we did the same thing. And for the rest of the staff, we had a team of Russian doctors, Russian lab techs, Russian X-ray technicians, and this sort of thing, and then a number of administrative people.
Hmm. And so how many did you bring over? How many doctors?
We had 6 or 7 doctors at any one time, so it was a pretty
Yeah.
substantial operation, and
Uh-huh.
we had emergency care at night. We had to create repatriation capabilities, um, and we had to create, since we were essentially a primary care and urgent care facility, we had to create the ability to take care of people who needed to be hospitalized and
Mm.
needed serious surgeries. There was at the time a network of Kremlin hospitals and polyclinics that had the best care Russia could offer. And we made arrangements with those limited access facilities to admit our patients on request. And the arrangement was that our doctors would sort of co-treat the patients, partly to assure that there was accurate translation, partly to assure proper follow-up, and certainly to assure that they had the right supplies of medications and antibiotics and bandages and that sort of thing, which were in somewhat short supply even in those facilities.
Right. And so where was your center located?
The International Business Center that Hammer set up just off the river there.
Oh, at the Mish. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of at right angles to it and right angles to the Russian White House. So
Okay.
we were a 5-minute walk from each of those.
Okay. And okay, so overall, how big a staff did you have?
Oh, 40.
40. And how many and you had inpatient, in-house sort of treatment facilities, right? For how many? For 5, 6
We
people?
had we had a few overnight beds for
Yeah.
stabilization, but if anybody needed something more than that, we would get them admitted and under supervisory care by us into one of these
Okay.
Kremlin hospitals.
Okay. And so I assume you had to get certified by Russian authorities?
Well, that's a good question, and it's an example of how things were sort of loosely applied in those days across the board.
Hmm.
Frankly, the country was glad to have us. Um, we had to have a licensed facility. Um, we cut some corners, but it was done with really no objection.
Okay. Okay. So you didn't go through some kind of formal licensing or no with inspectors showing up periodically from some help from the health ministry and all that kind of stuff that some other businesses went through, right?
That
Yeah.
that stuff came later,
Yeah.
and uh, as we get down the timeline, I ultimately left after a couple of years to set up U.S. Dental Care, which was designed to be a chain of dental clinics.
Oh, okay.
And but by this time, the the hands out for favors and accelerated treatment and this sort of thing had developed quite nicely. But in the time period you're just asking me about,
Right.
maybe a honeymoon period, we could say.
Oh, okay. So how long did the honeymoon last?
um, we had to do this. We had to do this about 6 months after I joined. We started the same thing in St. Petersburg,
Uh-huh.
and the culture there was a little wilder west than it was in Moscow, at least in our little bubble. And I suppose I could share an example of that. Um, in order to get facilities license, you had to have a legal lease. Now, since most real estate was still state owned, you couldn't actually get the right legal lease to support a license application. So, expedience being more important than sort of following all the rules, we agreed to lease a building that was on a state balance, but was actually controlled by a guy who turned out to be a gangster and controlled the casino market in St. Petersburg. So here's how that transaction happened. We agreed on a price. This was mostly done remotely. I had a couple of people in St. Petersburg at this point. In a facility on one of the canals in St. Petersburg, very nice. It had formerly been a Finnish medical clinic, was in disrepair, but it had the essential layout and some useful things that we needed to upgrade. So we went up or I went up for the closing. I met my local team, which at this point was two young women, an interpreter and a female pediatrician, um, early 20s, mid 20s. And so the idea was we would meet at the clinic, we would pay the rent, we would get the keys, shake hands, and sign a nominal document. And the price was not first month's rent, first year's rent in cash.
In cash.
Okay.
Okay.
On a handshake.
Cash, dollars or rubles?
Dollars.
Dollars.
Everything's dollars then, yeah.
Okay.
So I went up there with this cash in my pocket, and we had the meeting, and this guy walks in, the owner, and he was about 5'2", but he had three huge security guards with him
Uh-huh.
and a giant Great Dane. And it was
Okay.
in the middle of winter, and in they all walk and they take off their coats, and everybody does that. And we settle in around a table with the security guys, a little distance off. So we sit down to go through the last few points of this deal, and we ran up against one which we just violently disagreed over, and we went round and round and round. tempers flared a bit. So he stands up and he walks over to his overcoat and he pulls out a pistol. And he comes back and sits down across from me. And he puts the pistol in the middle of the table. And he says, you want to talk about that some more? So my stomach and my mouth did two different things. My stomach was churning, but I kept my cool and I kept my position. And we went around again a couple of times. And he smiled. He pulls out a cigarette and he picks up the pistol and lit a cigarette with it.
Oh, wow.
And he puts his hand out and we shook hands and that was the deal.
And that was the deal.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And did you see him again after that?
Never.
Yeah, that was it.
And we lived, we lived happily ever after for even beyond when I left the company. And ultimately the St. Petersburg, this is so-called the American Medical Center.
Yeah.
Ultimately the St. Pete AMC moved its location, as did the Moscow facility after some years.
Yeah. So who are your clients?
At that point, they were exclusively the expatriates and families of the multinational companies that were coming in. A minority were sort of the higher management, local management from those companies. The business model recognized that would shift over time, that we would not forever rely on an expatriate patient base, but we would step by step shift toward a private pay, Russian dominated business. And that took some years, but it's exactly what happened.
And is that business still in existence?
Yes. It moved twice, once during my tenure and once after my tenure, and then ultimately was purchased by, I think it's Rosno Insurance, and part of the same group that is, it's not MedX. I'd have to think for a second, but it's the premier service for this group of primary care clinics that are many. It's about 40 facilities.
I see. Does it still have the same name?
Yes.
Okay. Still called American Medical.
It's in small print, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
American Medical Center. Yeah.
Okay. And so the expat community, people had to become members of your service. It was like a concierge kind of service.
It wasn't a requirement, but since our base client arrangement was with the corporations, we would sign corporate membership agreements.
Okay.
With those companies, and that probably provided 75-80% of our patients. And anybody could come, fee for service.
Right. Okay. So this was part of the growth of the expat community at that time. Do you have any estimate of how big that community was at that point?
The numbers are fuzzy because we would try to answer that question in the early years, and it seems like it went from 25,000-40,000 at a point to a couple 100,000 at another point, and I couldn't peg a year on the calendar for that. Yeah.
I've asked the same question many times, many different people, and no one seemed to actually have a good sense of it. So how many people a week would filter through, do you guess?
Well, filter, I would quarrel with that word because we were really, really busy.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
We had a full house from 8 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. And then we would have an occasional urgency or emergency
right
at night or overnight. I would just have to do some quick math. I'm sure we were seeing 40 patients a day, easy.
Yeah. And were these diseases or injuries or I mean, did you have like oil field workers flown in from fields?
Yes.
And,
Yeah, we
yeah.
absolutely did. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So, I mean, it was everything from just a checkup, a flu, a vaccine for the kids going to school,
Right.
flu shots on the sort of easy family doctor side,
Yeah.
to the trauma of a car crash or a fall, um, or a mugging,
Uh-huh.
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then to ramp up severity, a heart attack, a diabetic coma, um, serious stuff, broken arm,
Hmm.
these sorts of things. And some of those would need to be stabilized overnight. Some of those would need emergency admission. And some of them would need stabilization and evacuation.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, and some of them were completely beyond the ability of our facility to handle. I think I shared with you the shooting cases that occurred at Ostankino in the October '93 uprising, the fight between Yeltsin and the parliament.
Uh-huh. And you had wounded people who were brought to your facility from that?
We had wounded people whose colleagues called us,
Yeah.
but those the generally they were picked up by a Moscow ambulance and taken to the Sklifosovsky trauma hospital.
Uh-huh.
And we were called to come there and try to help out.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And what was that like? I mean, can you say more about that? I mean, was that particularly traumatic for you and your doctors, that whole episode?
Yeah, it was well beyond the expectation of what any of us, especially me,
Yeah.
and for the doctors also, because these were general practitioners, primary care doctors, family doctors, pediatricians, internists, generally young, early 30s, and maybe one had worked in an emergency room in Canada,
Yeah.
a bit.
Yeah.
So we were wholly unqualified to look after gunshot victims. And there was one gentleman who was a New York Times photojournalist who'd been shot through the lung at Ostankino.
Wow.
And a smart thinking Russian security person put a plastic bag over his chest so that he could breathe through his other lung. But he was bleeding badly. He was taking Sklifosovsky. And we got the call and we headed over there. And coincidentally and fortuitously, my father had flown in the day before to visit.
Uh-huh.
My father was an experienced ER and trauma surgeon. So I took dad over there and together with the Russian docs from the hospital and our people looked at the images, decided that he needed emergency surgery. They asked my dad to scrub in with him and together they saved his life.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, wow. And that's quite a story. I mean,
That wasn't something I imagined when I was interviewing in Stamford, Connecticut, right?
right, 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 right. You were more in the vaccinations and
Yeah,
family colds and so on, right? Yeah,
right, right.
yeah. Was it well, I mean, so you had already been there maybe over a year at that point.
No, about
No,
9 months, 10 months.
no, 10 months.
This
Okay.
was this was October '93, and I had moved
Yeah.
over
Oh,
finally
that's right.
January of
Okay. You'd
'90.
only been there 10 months.
Yeah,
So was this all a surprise that all this struggle took place? Were you even sort of in tune with whatever the politics of the time were?
I think I can speak for a lot of people on the ground then that this was a simmering conflict that unfolded over a couple of weeks period. So the parliamentarians were blockaded in the White House,
Right.
and Yeltsin turned off the power, the whole building would go dark. Some of us would sit in our car across the river in front of the Ukraine hotel and see cooking fires or smaller fires used just to light the way. And then it heated up and heated up and heated, but everybody really expected it would just go away.
Mhm.
So when my dad called me a few days before coming, he said, "You sure it's safe?" I said, "Everybody says this is going to blow over. They'll sort it out." So when when the parliamentarians and their supporters broke out of the White House on that Sunday afternoon in October, it took everybody by surprise. They slowly moved their way up to Ostankino because, the power in these kinds of things comes from taking over the communication channel. And in those days, Russian Channel One and a couple of other state channels, they all broadcast from Moscow in this huge, tall television tower called Ostankino. So you take over the tower and you control the message, and that's a key strategy in an overthrow of a dictatorship type model. But they had plenty of time to prepare, and the presidential troops were inside and ready, and they just mowed down these protesters as they tried to break in to Ostankino. And the almost fatality I described was somebody just watching.
Yeah.
He was there to do his job, but there were other sort of silly foreigners who were there as tourists, sort of naively thinking this was something that they could watch, and people died. And
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a side note. I just think that in that period of time, many foreigners thought of themselves as invincible and outside of normal life. And so therefore we could do whatever we wanted. I think that was not uncommon feeling.
It absolutely was. We were sort of greeted and welcomed as sort of kings and princes and all that sort of stuff. And, a lot of us, not just Americans, we looked quite down at Russia, Russians, and the systems that we were exposed to. We thought ours were the best, and we said, we're going to turn you into sort of our image.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was you probably felt that way when you got there, right? When you looked around you, did you visit Russian medical facilities
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I have never been, sort of a snob, but it was not unobjective to see these facilities and understand that there's a long way to go here, and we can be part of the modernization process.
Yeah.
And within the medical communities, we were really, really warmly welcomed.
Warmly welcomed in the sense of, I would love to know what you know, and I'd like to opportunity to advance professionally, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So did you start studying Russian, and how did you get in any way?
I dove into Russian very eagerly. I've always had the view then and since that you should do everything you can to try to embrace the language of your host country. I did it when I lived in Taiwan with Chinese, business in mainland China in Chinese, in Spanish. And that was also pre-Russia. I was doing a lot of business in Mexico. So yeah, I studied the Russian Cyrillic alphabet on the flight over, and I always encourage people to do that because you're driving into the city from the airport, and you're a Russian speaker, right? There's so many words that if you know how to read the letters, they sound like our words.
Right.
Restaurant, pektapa.
Right. The pektapa was the famous one. That was always what Americans looked at restaurant and said pektapa. So that was one I remember very strongly.
But I dove head first into very, very intensive lessons.
Yeah. Well, so you were not a typical American in the sense that you had a lot of international experience. So you had past opportunities of interacting with other cultures and sort of what it took to interact with another culture, right? I think that's fair
That's a
statement.
that's a fair statement. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so who'd you interact with socially as you developed there? I mean, I know there were groups of Americans who played basketball together at the embassy, and there were particular expat restaurants and clubs, and it would be easy to just live within the expat community, and I know many people did. Um, what was your experience? Were you mostly within that community, or did you get outside of it? And what was that like?
I was part of that in the early days. Um, and it started to evolve as my Russian grew more toward fluency. Um, and I referred to this before, as I started having dates with Russian women,
Yeah,
as I started to become friendly with my neighbors and started being included or including Russians in things simply like drinking vodka or going to a cafe for a tea or a coffee, or that sort of thing.
right.
Um, but the you were absolutely right when you said sort of atypical, but I thought you were going to say something else, which was that the classic expat arriving to work for a multinational company had a car and a driver and a family and lived outside and had help in the house.
Right, right.
Didn't necessarily need to learn to speak Russian, and in many cases never did. And you know, the ability to speak the language is a window onto the culture and the relationship, and it's the open window onto the heart of Russians, which is the key.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you were able to make that transition. Other people never did, so they saw the country in a different way than you saw it. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Um, and because you're a speaker, if you're in a conversation or a negotiation and you can understand what's being said in Russian, you understand that the way the translation comes back to you has some nuances or even some mistakes
right,
because you don't know enough about your translator's language to know how well he or she understood.
right,
Yeah,
right. I've learned that translators almost never translate; they paraphrase, and that
yeah,
there's a lot lost in that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, as you began to learn the language, did it change your perception of the systems around you, or your initial perception of the country? Did it change that for you?
It did. Let me. I'm going to repeat the sort of window analogy.
Yeah,
Or maybe the curtains through which you look through the window that
yeah,
block you look from looking through the window, slowly get more and more open. And what started out as a people, a culture, a language that was rather opaque started to become more and more transparent.
hmm,
Um, and of course, there are all these little mini learning experiences along the way that are building blocks to a better understanding of what's inside a Russian person's mind and heart, and that sort of thing. Like everybody says, you start out not understanding why Russians don't smile
right,
until you figure out that if somebody smiles, you're on the road to his or her heart and a relationship.
yeah, yeah,
And and today, sorry, we're not supposed to go present tense, but as I started to visit home and people would say, "Hi, how are you?" Or "Hi, hi, how are you?" Somebody you don't know was on the street. And I learned as one of my early lessons in Russia that you really only ask, "How are you?" if you really care about the answer. So I remember in the early days at the medical center, we'd all come in from a weekend, a Monday morning, and I'd say, "Hey, how are you? How was your weekend?" And I'll sort of mash together the answers, look at me seriously, say, "Well, my grandmother had to go in the hospital and my dog died and my cat got run over by the car." And I learned not to ask that question in that context, right?
Right. Because you actually got a real answer. It was a real
Right.
question.
Right.
It wasn't a form of greeting. Yeah. So, so you were at the American Medical Center for how long? 3 years?
No, just over two.
Over two. And were
Right.
you beginning to get the language by the time you left there?
Most definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you don't mind, why did you leave? And you started this other business or managed the other business. So
Right.
tell me about that transition.
My relationship with the guy who hired me um, started to sour, and in parallel with that, I had in parallel with my coming to understand that this was not going to be a long-term relationship.
Mm.
I had my entrepreneurial instincts started to twitch. Mind you, I'd never done anything entrepreneurial before. Adventuresome to be sure, but
Right.
there's a whole basket of risk that comes with doing something on your own. So one of the benefits of the American Medical Center was I could see that there was a demand for dentistry that we were not filling. So I came up with an idea that was rather obvious, but harder to execute than to imagine, which was to do the same business model, but for dentistry.
Uh-huh.
So things reached a point with Dennis where we just agreed that this wasn't going to work. So I called him up and I said, "Oh, I'm out." We had a big blow up, and I said, "All right, I'm done."
Mm-hmm.
And then I had started to prepare, and it took another 6 months to get this going. So he called me up the next day and he said, "Bobby, I think we were too hasty." He said, "Look, I understand why you don't want to keep doing what you're doing, but we need to open up AMC Kazakhstan. Can you go down and do that for me?"
Uh-huh.
So I said, "All right," because I had the time to do it as I was preparing the other.
Right.
That was another great adventure because I went down and somehow got in touch with the son-in-law of President Nazarbayev,
Uh-huh.
who
Okay.
was a
Not somehow. That's how business was probably transpired.
right, right,
And
right.
so you were in Almaty or
That's right.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we put together a JV that would be taking over a wing of a hospital that he was given as a gift by his father-in-law,
Uh-huh.
right? As these things go.
Uh-huh.
And it was
Yeah.
going to be the American Kazakhstan Medical Center. And so we did the deal. And I said, "Dennis, okay, I've done it. Here it is. And I'm going to go do something else. I can't really tell you about what that is yet." And I left completely and started US Dental Care.
And you didn't think about leaving Russia at that time. You were still committed to Russia or whatever the opportunity that you saw there.
It was, truth be told, it was
Yeah.
that. Plus, I had a very serious girlfriend, an American woman at that time.
Okay. Okay.
And I built a bit of a life around
Uh-huh.
her and us and the community. And all that taken together, I'm sticking around for a while.
Yeah. 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 And so how did you wanted to do the same model? You had to go to the same people, the same multinationals, or probably the same human resource people in those multinationals. But it, I assume it took a big investment of equipment, and to get this going.
Yeah,
Did you self-finance? Do you have investors, or how did you do it?
it was both. I financed the majority and brought in a small handful of investors for the minority, and we got it done. It took about
Yeah.
seven,
Yeah.
8 months to
Uh-huh.
open.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And you opened one location to begin
We
with?
opened Moscow, and we
Yeah.
opened a second Moscow, and this this story crashes into the 1998 default.
Okay.
And
How? Yeah.
well, we were on the verge of a significant scaling. So we proved the model twice.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we'd also opened one in Baku, Azerbaijan,
Okay.
and we had already broken through that barrier to the Russian community that had the means to pay. By this time, we're late 1995,
Uh-huh.
and so we're sorry, that's when we started. So we're now summer of 98, and it was August of 98 when the crash happened.
Right.
But we had put together a plan to duplicate the Russian side of the business. So we had set up a dual system. We created a residency program for Russian dentists to be trained by our foreign dentists,
Okay.
and offered Russians a choice of seeing the American side dentist at one price or the Russian
Uh-huh.
side dentist at a lower price.
Okay.
And we had decided to spin off this Russian based model, which we called World Class, into a 4 or 5, this is starting in Moscow, clinics. Then 98 came, and a lot of things for a lot of people and businesses went on ice.
Right.
Um, and we never picked it back up after the recovery. So
Okay. Okay. Wait, meaning you stayed where you were with the hybrid Russian American dentistry, and how many centers did you have at that point?
we just moved one more time into a bigger facility that
Okay.
had room to grow, and
Uh-huh.
that's where it was when I ultimately sold the business.
I see. When did you sell it?
Um, late approaching 2010. I don't remember the exact year.
Okay. So
Yeah,
quite a bit longer you operated that business, right? That, yeah,
yeah, quite a bit longer. I owned it. I had transitioned others into running it, so
I
that I
see.
set up yet another company that was called Newbridge Group, whose business model was to facilitate the market entry, growth, and financing directly or through partners of interested Western companies. So this was when sort of the second round of interest from the West was coming into the country.
Okay. When did you set that up, that
This
group?
would have been, we would have started that in 07, 08.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So full recovery from 1998, and
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay. Okay. And um so a lot of people left in 1998, and the expat community shrunk considerably. How did that impact you? And did you just were you at that point considering packing up and leaving, or not?
In 98, no,
Yeah.
because we really didn't have a choice. We had to save the business.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And as you know from either living through it or reading it, it bounced back remarkably quickly.
Uh-huh.
6 to 9 months later, we were kind of back in business.
Right.
The ruble had weakened overnight, and people were going to casinos with their worthless rubles, or buying anything they could buy from the grocery store with the rubles as quick as they could spend it.
Right.
Or using it to start fires in their fireplace in some cases. But anyway, I went off somewhere from your question. What was it?
Yeah. So you didn't consider leaving. And did it change your clientele? Who were your customers? Did that change because of 98 collapse? I mean, in other words, I guess I'm asking you, you have more Russian customers instead of it being expats?
I don't remember the percentages, but we already had a meaningful percentage of Russian clientele, a meaningful minority.
Right.
And yes, expat companies and expats left, but it wasn't that big of a drop in our patient flow.
Okay. Okay.
So we were mostly hurt by the devaluation of the dollar. I mean, of the ruble.
Of the ruble. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so what was your relationship, back to my question previously about the regulators, what was your relationship to the regulators with your dental practice?
Well, this gets into the era of the nasty relations businesses had with the tax inspectorate and the tax police.
Right.
We were operating in a world where, try as we might, we couldn't do everything we needed to do and 100% be compliant with all the rules.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you one good example. We had a dental laboratory, and in order to make crowns, you needed to make them with ceramic on top of gold. To have gold, you needed to have a special license, a special secure way of storing it. And it was impossible for a business like ours to get that kind of license. Well, we did it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Somebody found out about it and faked on us to somebody else. And we got word that we were going to get raided. And there was actually also another issue with our license that we'd been trying to remedy, and in order to be in full compliance. But we had a window of vulnerability, and we were about to get raided. So by this time, I was savvy enough to understand what the game was, and what I did was find a competing group who was sort of a bigger dog than the group's dog that was about to raid us.
Uh-huh.
And they staged a raid an hour before the smaller dog people came. So when the smaller dog guys turned up, the big dog says, "This is ours.
Uh-huh.
We're not going to share."
A form of Krisha for you.
It wasn't. No, well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a Krisha. We had a Krisha before 98 when you actually had to have physical security. But we had a Krisha. In addition to that, we had a Krisha. But we actually had a militia guy sitting in our lobby with a machine gun.
Uh-huh.
In a dental clinic.
In the dental clinic. I'm going to have to see the dentist, and I got to have security.
Right. Okay. But that was,
yeah, it was the times.
It was a time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, we prevailed in that.
So this other agency, obviously had some interest in helping you, and they fended off the less important agency. That
right.
Fair. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was a transaction fee.
Yeah. And how long did this period last where you had to have a militiaman with an automatic weapon in your lobby? When did that stop?
We had to end our contract with them because of the post 98 economic situation. very nervously went to them and said, "We're in trouble. We simply can't afford you." And
Hmm.
went through a couple of stages where we reduced the fee a couple of times, and finally we just said goodbye in what we hope was friendly terms, and
Yeah.
it turned out to be so.
Uh-huh.
Luckily.
Okay. Okay. Because around shortly after that, at the period where Putin is just becoming, the head of the state, it seems like a lot of that Krisha activity was federalized, if you will, and those private groups kind of went away. Is that a fair statement? Or did you
It did
experience?
happen. I don't remember the exact period. I think it was a bit after the 98 crash,
Yeah,
and was
yeah.
not really related to our situation. But I forget for a moment when Putin first came in as president.
Yeah, I think it was, and again, I should know this cold, but I believe it was 99. And,
Okay.
and
Okay.
then he was appointed, I believe, by Yeltsin in 99, and then he was elected in around 2000, I think.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so, um, so were you impacted by the politics of the time? In other words, you have this 1996 election, huge, competition and controversy over whether Yeltsin was going to be reelected or not. And then you have the whole period after that and kind of his decline. Did any of these big events impact you in your business or in your thoughts about the country or any of that?
No, we seem to be in a sector that was somewhat not immune from, it's not really the right word, but separated from all of that.
Yeah.
Um, I was amongst those that thought Putin's arrival was a welcome change from
Hmm.
the mess that Yeltsin had turned into. I know I'm not alone in
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're not. You're not. You're
that.
not. You're not. Other people I've interviewed have said the same, and particularly you're talking about what you thought at that time. Uh,
Exactly. That's
based on
right.
what you knew, what you saw. Um, so you know, so I'm back to some of this, the impact of your dentistry on the broader dentistry industry in Russia, because yeah,
Hmm.
I'll just give you an example. I interviewed someone who, I mean, Russians have always went to the movies, but I interviewed someone who changed the way they went to the movies by changing the movie theater and the experience of the movie theater. So even though it was as if it was a new industry, and and a lot of the changes in the post-Soviet period were new sectors. I mean, clearly real estate and finance didn't exist under Soviet times, had to be created. Uh, and I and other sectors like restaurants were completely different and were changed. And
Yeah.
you think that, and again, changed under the influence of foreigners and Westerners, Americans in particular. Do you see any of that same process in either in terms of the medical sector or the dental sector in terms of your bigger impact just by being who you were?
We're speaking about Paul Hath Cinema Company, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I know Paul well and did back then.
yeah,
And
yeah. I have an interview upcoming with him. To be honest with you, I interviewed him and I lost the interview, so I need to redo it. So that's why I know what he did, but I didn't know whether to use his name. But yeah, that's Paul. That's who I was speaking of.
right.
Yeah,
No, the Kodak Cinema next to Pushkin Square, and then
yeah.
later the multiplexes. Well, that was the third
Multiplexes. I
stage.
mean, it
But then,
changed the experience of daily
yep,
life and entertainment, right?
yep,
So
yep. I mean, to be sure, and Paul can tell you the figures, but Russians, Soviets were very, very avid moviegoers.
Mm.
And there's a whole network of theaters, and going to see a film in one of those old theaters is kind of a cool experience.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them have since been upgraded substantially. But Paul's model, well, took it from Kodak on Pushkin to first very large cinema at the very first mega mall in Khimki. But since then, he's mushroomed into the multiplexes that we've gotten so used to, or back then got used to. And that was yet another generation of change for the Russian moviegoer. But to apply that back to us, I would say not on the scale that a movie theater would have changed the culture of going to the movies, and because we're also talking about the content. So there was international content.
That's true.
It was just Soviet content. Yeah.
Right.
But the theater itself was different. The food offering was different. The whole experience was better sound, better lighting, better atmosphere, cleaner, comfortable, all that sort of stuff. So hats off to Paul. So the both, I think I could mix these together by talking about both medicine and dentistry, because it was the same idea. It was injecting and introducing into the community something that was operating at this level while the rest of the system was operating, at this level. So on a smaller scale level, I think we made significant changes in people's health, their lives. In dentistry, I would say, and this is it's sort of a small example, but Americans are used to getting their teeth cleaned and having a checkup every 6 months. Russians are used to going to the dentist if something hurts.
Mm-hmm.
So introducing preventive medicine, preventive dental care was something in our world revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
It was a fight to get somebody to forward schedule themselves for 6 months or even 12 months. Well, I'll call you if I need you. No, you need to get a cleaning because of what the doctor told you in the exam room back there, et cetera. And then in addition to that, we inherited, and this was great for the business, we inherited decades of bad care that needed to be repaired. And more than once, some, dad or husband would say, and I had these conversations myself sometimes, and mostly it was with the doctors. So I got a choice. I can buy a new Mercedes, or I can fix my wife's teeth.
Mm.
Well, sir, it's up to you. They would always choose the teeth.
Yeah. Okay.
And then there would be guys who would come to me and say, I've been dating this girl and I want to bring her in and get her teeth checked. And I said, just be aware that may be a $10,000 decision.
Wow.
And it always was.
Wow.
I said, how serious are you with this girl?
Yeah. So what kind of damage were you taking care of at that level? These were missing teeth. These are loose teeth. These are highly decayed teeth, right? Yeah.
Rotten teeth. Very, very bad periodontal disease.
Yeah.
So you're talking about extractions, root canals, implants, dentures, bridges, crowns.
Yeah. And why was Soviet dentistry so bad? Do you know? Do you have a theory of that? Like why? I'm just curious whether is there any theory about that. Why?
Well, lumping it together with medicine.
Yeah.
There was limited budget for equipment.
Yeah.
Limited opportunities for exchange of best practices on an international level. It was a closed off system. Doctors, dentists were ill paid. They were just, paid at the upper scale of a good laborer, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
The government was very chintzy on the budget funds it gave to polyclinics and hospitals. Repairs, something would break and repair it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just got stuck in the 40s, and it never
Yeah.
really was prioritized as something to catch up with the world, and the world passed it by.
Yeah. Yeah. So your example must have created some ripple effect of demand for a better quality care, or did it? Do you know?
It absolutely did. And in since we're in dentistry now, so I'll stick to
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
going forward. But we're now in a period where Russia was sprinting to catch up across the board,
Hmm.
and dental clinics were springing up, very nicely equipped. They were still well behind in the capabilities, but our company alone, we we spawned dozens of well-trained people who went on to work elsewhere or do their own thing, that sort of thing. We had a lot of exchanges within some version of a dental association, in Moscow. Um, and it did have a ripple effect, and that sort of conjoined with the race to catch up. It
Uh-huh.
took longer for took longer for the education and the competence to catch up, but it eventually almost did.
Hmm.
And during the later years of our clinic, I would have even expats say, we've got a really good Russian dentist we trust, and it's a lot cheaper than your place. And I said, I think that's absolutely fine, but if you get into something that's a more serious procedure, like an implant, that could have, not life-threatening, but consequences to your whole jaw,
Yeah.
get a second opinion from our folks
Uh-huh.
before you make the decision.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, just you trained many, many people who went off and saw your model and thought, I can do this in my
Yeah,
hometown of Vologda or Samara or someplace, right?
some of them did go back to those towns, but most of it stayed in Moscow.
Most
So
of it stayed in Moscow. Okay.
so like with so many things, Moscow grew up first and others followed.
Right, right. And so, did you ever think of going into dental education as a business? Just out
Not
of
as a
curiosity.
business. There wasn't much money in education, but we invested
Okay.
a ton of money into what I called a mini residency program, which we first did at the American Medical Center, and then we did at US Dental Care.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. So, so going back to my question about social life, where by this time, were you more, or were you still pretty much wrapped up in the expat community, or had your social connections diversified by this time into Russians and Russian social life?
Definitely had diversified. I don't think it was ever majority Russian. I think it was always majority expat.
Uh-huh.
But by this time, everything was intermingled.
Mm.
I'll just give an example. Um, you've probably been to the Moscow Country Club, golf club.
I actually was never there, but I know what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I had never been a golfer, even though I'd lived in Florida, Arizona, California, and played wedding golf a few times. But because everybody was playing golf, and because it was a social outlet as well, I joined. And that was a really interesting multicultural group of expats from all over, Western expats, Koreans, some Japanese, and a quickly growing cohort of Russians. And a golf club is a very social place to be. playing golf is a very social thing. You're together for 3.5, 4 hours on the course. You come back to the clubhouse, you have a meal, you have drinks, there are occasional parties and also. Now, this was a moneyed class on the Russian side who were members there. But it was very much integrated and very, very enjoyable because of that. Which doesn't mean, so now this is interesting. There was a point at which, remember we talked about the arriving foreigners being kings and princes and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
By this time, a lot of Russians had a lot of money. It was unbelievable money, as you can remember. And even below that oligarch tier, there were plenty of minigarchs, and there was a lot of money out at the Moscow Country Club. Well, the tables were kind of turned. Everybody liked to socialize together, but there was a social pecking order within that crowd. And it got driven home one time. We had two tournaments every year. One tournament was the rest of the world against Russia. And this particular year, it was the Russians' job to organize the T-shirts for both teams and get them printed and that sort of stuff. So they pulled one over on us. We all get our T-shirts, we put them on, or before we put them on, we turn them over, and it says Gastarbeiter. And that's the old German prisoner of war workers.
Oh, okay.
Post World War II.
And how did you all react to that one?
Well, we laughed in the right way, but we wanted to flip a little middle finger toward them and the other.
Right.
But and that went right along with what I remember a couple times a guy or two would say, "We're not really happy that you're stealing our women."
Yeah. Did you ever start encountering people who said who were like pushing back on America as the model for Russia by that time? Was that ever consciously expressed to you? Or that foreigners were arrogant towards?
For sure, at a point, there was this almost complete rejection of the idea that the American way was somehow better. Business, economics, ethics, golf. And I can't really put a finger on it right now of when that switch happened. Certainly the shock therapy stage had long passed, and that whole period had rejected what was trying to be forced upon them. I still am waiting for Jeffrey Sachs to apologize for thinking that what worked in Poland would work in a country that had no history pre-Soviet of democracy, market system. If you hear about it, let me know.
Okay, will do. So you got your later business was in facilitating market entry and partnership development, this consulting business. And I'm assuming, listening to you, that your capabilities or whatever, your attitudes or whatever in that were shaped on the one hand by a much greater and deeper familiarity with Russia, its market, having contacts through things like this golf club that allowed you to do that kind of business, along with facing maybe some beginning pushback from Russians. So was that dynamic played out in your consulting business in terms of receptivity to foreign partners, or how you had to now structure foreign partnerships because the terms were changed or the frames of reference were changed? I hope you know what I'm asking you. So
I think so. There was a window which we were in at this point where Russians were extremely eager to partner with incoming foreign companies that represented something new for the market.
mhm.
And that could be, hey, we want to be a franchisee, regional, national, multinational. We want to be a distributor. So there was a keenness to be matched with these companies that they didn't have the means to do on their own. And there was a new flood of interest on the Western side, to come in. So we were absolutely in the right period to be the middle person for that. And it wasn't any sort of brokerage. It was a significant, more sophisticated marrying of compatibilities that also included investment and also included legal structuring in a very careful way, and negotiations. Just as an example of this, you had KFC that wanted to come into Russia, and you may remember there was a chicken brand called Rostik's.
Yes,
You
yes.
probably
I interviewed Henry Winther, who was one of the founders of that, or implementers of it. So yeah.
Well, let me tell you a story that includes Henrik.
Oh, good.
All right. So KFC had come to us, and they were our client, and their business plan was to take over the market because they were KFC and they still had this, chest beating, idea. And they wanted help with everything involved in market entry. And we said, it's a dumb idea because Rostik's controls the market.
Mhm.
You should buy Rostik's. No, we're KFC. We can do this ourselves. We'll take over the market. Finally, they said, okay, we'll talk to them if they'll talk to us. So I got in touch with Rostislav and with Henrik. Was very good friends with him and them, and their reaction was, why the hell do we need KFC?
Mm.
So along comes the annual Rosinter. That was the name of the company.
That's the parent company, correct? Right.
They used to do a very extravagant international trip for a large group of people, like 80.
Well,
And this year the trip was to Malaysia, and then over to Malaysian Borneo. And they invited me to go along. There were maybe six guests.
mhm.
And Henrik and I had been friendly and friends and developed into friends for long years. So he and I decided to play golf, and we're talking about this deal, and he's saying, we don't need these guys. We control the market. And I said, but what about the recipes? The recipes are famous. They're really gonna. He said, we don't need their recipes. Long story short, we talked him and Rostislav into doing not a full acquisition, but a majority acquisition, which they would set up a co-owned company that would be dual branded for a period of years, 3 or 5, I don't remember which. And that Henrik would run that company, and he became the president of Rostik's KFC. And KFC would fund the expansion of X number of restaurants, and at a point they had a buy option, which they exercised. And about two years into the process, I was talking to Henrik one day. I said, whatever happened with the KFC recipes? Did you incorporate those? And he said, yeah. And I said, any effect on sales? He said, yeah. How much? They went up 20%.
Wow. Wow.
Do I have to say I told you so, Henrik?
That's pretty significant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. And what is the state of that relationship now? What happened and how did that work out with KFC Rostiks?
Oh, they exploded
Yeah.
both both before and after the they exercised the option, and then they solo branded it KFC and expanded all over the place.
Okay. So the they is KFC took the option, took
Right,
over Rostiks, and then has expanded all over. And
right.
are they still there? Do you know?
Yes, it is. I can't remember what they're calling it now. But they paused for a while but they didn't stop. I don't know what they're doing about the recipe ingredients.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay.
Which, I don't know when you interviewed Henrik, but he's
It
not
was
one.
in 2021, I think.
Ah,
Most of my interviews were done before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so this was, 20, it was during COVID.
Hmm.
So most of
Okay.
them. So I,
Well, he
I
had,
don't know what's happened since then. So look, I mean, the idiot question, and one that's just to give you free reign, if you will, is you what is this very significant period of time you spent there? What's the impact on you personally and professionally? I mean, how do you think Russia changed you as along with you changing Russia?
well, I ultimately got married to my Russian girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and my first marriage, I started late. So personally, it's been the most significant change in my lifetime.
Yeah, yeah.
I suppose you could say that was the culmination of a lot of other personal changes that have changed me as a person from the guy I was that went over in 1992 to Russia. But and any of us, I can't imagine anybody you've interviewed doesn't doesn't say that they've been changed. The
Oh,
question is
absolutely, absolutely.
to put your finger on exactly what that means. Um, you said professionally as well.
Yeah.
Um, so professionally, I'm a different type of business person than I was when I went over there. And somebody said, what's one example of something? I said, well,
Yeah.
I see around corners in ways I couldn't see before I went to Russia.
Hmm. Explain that a little much more.
There's always something around the corner in Russia that is unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
I remember back when things would be going great at the American Medical Center, and there'd be, no crises that had happened that week or for 2 weeks, and the staff would start getting nervous.
Hmm.
And I said, everything's going great. What do you know? Something's about to happen. Something's about to happen. Something always happens. Not even just in August, but something's going to happen. And so many things did happen in simple but even very exaggerated ways that almost nothing surprises me now,
Hmm.
and very little happens that I haven't laid out as on the list of possibilities or probabilities. So I guess you could call that, in fancy terms, superior risk analysis, anticipation, and prevention. And I think another to veer into the personal, and this comes into greater focus every time I'm together with a group like you weren't at Mike Calvi's book reading, were you?
No, I was not. No, no, I know
So I
very.
mentioned this get together that we all have every December, and there are smaller versions of that where everybody's sort of talking nostalgically, et cetera, et cetera. But almost to a person, they're not as fully fulfilled by what they're doing outside of Russia than when they were doing it in Russia, because the experience of life and business just challenges you multidimensionally, and it's simpler outside of Russia than it was there. It's not quite checkers and chess because it's not that dramatically different. But for people like me that lived in that environment for so long, it's less interesting to do business here than it was there. Now, I don't know. I've told you I still have a business in Russia.
You mentioned it, and I didn't know whether to ask you about that or not.
No, this will be published long after whatever anybody might want to say badly about somebody who hasn't self-sanctioned. But I spend the first several hours of each morning in management meetings with my team in Moscow. So I'm not completely divorced from Russia, and I'm not completely divorced from the challenges of daily business.
Right. And so it was difficult to move away from that environment then.
I don't think difficult's the right word, because we made this decision to do that for two reasons. So in 2014, after Crimea and the sanctions onslaught and all that, the business environment changed greatly. The attitude toward American or European business deteriorated significantly. And even though I've been a board member of the American Chamber of Commerce to this day, I felt it keenly through the beginning of the departures. Of course, that accelerated dramatically after February 2022. But we had no plans to leave Russia. In fact, we had a plan. We had a house in France to straddle Europe and Moscow for the foreseeable future. But then our youngest daughter was born, and all of a sudden we just had this idea that we would rather bring her up in the American education system, than there. And how would we do it if we lived in both Russia and France? And it became complicated. So with my, and then on the business side, we had gotten the business to the point where my Swedish partner and I both thought that we could live in our respective countries, share the management of the business. We had a really outstanding team, and still do, with almost no risk of them stealing out from under us.
Okay, good. Yeah.
That's happened far too many times, as you probably have heard about.
Yes.
So we just made the decision to move the family to the States, and that was in the middle of 2019. The planning for that started in probably mid 2016.
Okay. Do you care to say what your business is, your current business, or is that something?
Oh no, it's not a secret.
Yeah.
Completely different sector. It's not. It's the first non-healthcare thing I did in Russia. It's in the retail real estate sphere. It's called Retail Profile, and we rent from large shopping centers their entire common areas on a master lease basis, sublease places to kiosks and promotional stands, and manage that program in about 13 cities in Russia and several in Sweden.
That's interesting. I never thought of that as a separate sort of business, actually. I mean,
it's not a model that exists here, because the 90% of the Class A shopping centers are owned by about 5 companies, huge companies. No reason for them to outsource business. The market's much more fragmented in Russia.
Uh-huh.
There are about 600 or so shopping malls of reasonable size.
Yeah.
And at any given time, we'll have this model going in about 30 of them.
It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So, shopping malls is another one of those areas in which the Russian life was transformed in the experience of shopping in ways that, despite sanctions and everything else, still remain. I mean, there's so much, it seems to me, from that period that it's structural and institutional that remains. It's not very well acknowledged or recognized, I think. I don't know if you agree, but it
No,
seems
I've seen it happen daily since February 2022.
yeah, yeah,
And bear in mind that this until autumn of 2023, I was traveling back there every quarter for 2 weeks.
okay,
So I watched this exodus happen and I watched the Russians pivot to fill the gaps that foreigners had left.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And maybe surprisingly to many, I don't know about you, but the consumer spending power has been remarkably stable. So the shopping center business and ours as well, which depends on the traffic in the shopping
right,
centers,
right,
has done just fine.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting. It's interesting. Again, I'm not sure whether we should how much of this particular discussion to include in the archive, but I think the growth of the shopping centers is it's so significant in how people live, and the change in the retail sector is so dramatic from when I first started going there and when you first started there, that it's astounding. Anyway,
Well, you remember the first truly modern shopping center was the Mega Mall in Himki that's
uh-huh,
owned
uh-huh.
by that was the IKEA shopping center division.
Right, right. So that was before the remodeling of Menage and that underground shopping center and right outside Red Square?
I don't remember. Henrik would know because they put a Planet Sushi there. I don't
Yeah, and
I
him,
don't
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't remember. But this was, I mean, if you've not been in, it's just a classic suburban shopping mall format.
right, right.
Um, it was different from the Manege.
Okay, the Menage was meant to be a high-end retail or close to it, I think. Yeah, yeah,
And Mega Mall was set up as a family place. There's an IKEA, there's a playground, there was a movie theater, Paul's Theater,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
and there was an Auchan hypermarket,
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
and there was a big parking lot, so everybody came in their cars. They
Right.
they set up buses to run from the metro. They did all kinds of innovative things,
Right.
and that was one of our first clients. We used to run all the mega malls.
Huh.
Ancillary retail is what we call it.
Okay. All right. When did that relationship start with Himki?
2008,
2008. Yeah.
and that ran for 5 years, and then it just restarted last week
Oh,
or last month. We just signed a new agreement with them.
right. Right.
Different ownership.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. And there's still modern, contemporary kind of mall and upscale or what is it? Family oriented? Yeah.
Mega malls kind of stood still for a while, rested on their laurels, while other more modern, bigger more expensive malls got built.
Uh-huh.
A prime example would be Avia Park. It's near where the Aerostar Hotel is. Remember the Aerostar Hotel?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. See, it's the biggest mall in Europe. It's huge.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of our centers as well.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
4 floors, sprawling, just does huge hypermarkets, hyper sports, hyper-sized DAY, movie theaters, a whole floor of kid stuff, an unbelievably big food court, ice skating rink.
Uh-huh. Wow. So is the merchandise in these malls now more sourced from Chinese, Turkish sources or Russian brands that have replaced European and American brands?
More the second than the Chinese.
Yeah. Okay.
There's definitely some Chinese.
Yeah.
Chinese brands aren't really a great fit if we're talking about fashion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some Turkish brands, but there's been a lot of rebranding, like all the Inditex. Zara,
Right.
for example, was simply rebranded. Hasn't done so well compared to Russian competitors, which swooped in.
Uh-huh.
And then there's a lot of on the non-clothing, if you're talking about cosmetics and perfumes and things like that, and some of the fashion clothing, it's all still there. It's just
Yeah.
has to come in through a gray import scheme.
Okay. Right. Right. Your old friend, the Kazakhs and others. Yeah. Um, So listen, are there things that you wanted to talk about? Because I've sort of veered off into the present here without, kind of wrapping up the 90s, early 2000s. Are there things that you wanted to talk about or say that I didn't ask you about or that you think are important that you would like included in this?
We could probably talk for another couple of hours. I,
Right.
I think we've done a decent job of covering the main points. You'd mentioned a couple of topic areas that I made some notes on. I'm just having a quick look here.
Sure.
Oh, here's one. You asked about failures.
Yes. Right.
Um, the one I regret the most is this. If we go back to the U.S. dental care in 1998,
Hmm.
and we had this plan to scale up what we called our world-class division, and went on the shelf for 6 months. We never pulled it off. Um, we did not anticipate two things. One, how quickly Russia would pull out of this slump, but two, how nimble were Russian entrepreneurial dentists. And they so quickly filled this space that we were about to enter.
Uh-huh.
It made us late to the party, and that's the real reason it had to stay on the shelf.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that's almost same story repeated itself in 2022. So all these big Western retailers left. There was a ton of vacant space. We conceived the idea of creating what we called a small department store for fashion retail. Russian designers would have about 30 corners in a large space, Russian designers, and we would own and manage and lease these little corners. Same model we had in the common areas with these kiosks, but it'd be corners in one big department store area.
Uh-huh.
And we were very careful because what everybody was in uncharted territory. How much is this going to kill consumer spending? How popular are the Russian fashion brands going to be?
Right.
And we spent an awful lot of time studying it. Well, by the time we were ready to press go, other Russian brands had swooped in and taken over all these empty big boxes.
Uh-huh.
And there wasn't any place left for us to put our concept in the shopping malls that we knew we would be successful in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was the exact same process, this Western caution and this lack of an instinct about how the Russians would move more quickly and smartly in filling a certain niche.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. And
That's what I would put in the failure category.
right, right. Very interesting. Okay. Good, good, good. Anything else that pops to mind?
I'm sure 5 or 10 will come to mind after we've hung up.